Hello, thank you for watching this video. My name is Toby Gardner. I'm the Director of the TRASE Initiative and a Senior Research Fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute. I'm going to give a brief overview of the work that we're doing on TRASE, some of the new data tools and systems that we've developed, and where we're going in the next 5 years. TRASE's vision is to help empower a transition towards more sustainable commodity production and consumption systems, whether that be by markets, but also by governments and civil society. And our mission to aid in this is to help revolutionize the transparency of global trade. And we're doing that principally by having developed a new approach to mapping supply chains that looks at the connections from regions of production to countries of import via trading companies, but does that for the entirety of a given sector. Exports of Brazilian soy, Indonesian palm oil, for example. And TRASE is an independent science-based initiative which has 3 elements at its core. The TRASE Earth, which is the overall domain for TRASE, houses the main data product which has driven most of our work and our research to date, which is about connecting the supply chains in the way that I've described, linking regions of production to countries of import via trading companies. TRASE Finance is a new tool and data system that we launched in October of this year, which builds on the work of TRASE Earth and the supply chain mapping that we've done by mapping the ownership of trading companies and flows of capital, whether through investment or lending, into those companies. And our Insights portal, which was also launched this year, which you can find at insights.trace.earth on the homepage, is a new repository of all of the insights and publications that we've put out to date, including the 2020 TRACE Yearbook, which provides an accessible stocktake of the contribution that TRACE data make to understanding the sustainability of the main supply chains that we've mapped so far. And who TRACE is for? TRACE is here to provide an independent and open access source of information that can both enable market actors, leaders, whether they be investors, commodity buyers of one form or another, or indeed consumer countries, to better manage risk and to better target investments and interventions in supply chain engagements. And on the flip side, TRACE is also there to strengthen accountability around these supply chains. And in doing both, it seeks to help catalyze improvements by leaders and also lower standards and motivate more actors to commit more ambitious sustainability goals and help deliver on those goals. Historically, we've relied a lot on national level trade data to understand embedded environmental impacts of trade in commodities like soy, beef, palm oil, timber. However, this is of course extremely blunt. Where within a country as vast as Brazil that a commodity like soy comes from has a huge bearing on the level of deforestation or emissions or other impacts that may be linked to it. So what TRACE does is it goes under the hood of differences in subnational levels of production and therefore associated sustainability impacts. And you can explore this on the site in the supply chain tools section, where you can look, in this case, at Brazilian soy, all of the municipalities, some 2,000 that produce and export soy, via exporting and importing companies to the countries where soy is imported. And you can zoom in on the supply chain of interest. So if we were to search and select Germany, then we can filter all of this immense complexity and look and focus only on this supply chain of interest. And we can see immediately that the main producing regions that export soy from Brazil into Germany are in the Cerrado region of the northern Cerrado region of Matopiba, which is also coincidentally where there's the highest rates of deforestation for soy expansion in Latin America. And then you can dig in to understand about these regions, who's exporting from those regions, who are the main players, and then you can look at these flows, whether it's in terms of volumes of soy, but once you've made this connection, TRACE then enables us to link those flows to measures of deforestation on the ground, and therefore estimate the risk that buyers, whether they be companies or countries, are exposed to deforestation in the regions that they're sourcing from. And the data that allow us to do this are many, but the backbone of our supply chain mapping is individual per shipment records of trade, whether it be customs data or bills of lading, and we stitch these together with different data, whether it's self-declared information from companies on assets, logistics and connections, traceability reports, domestic transportation, but also government data on production, on listings of where assets are. And we bring all this together to provide what we believe to be the best available estimate of supply chain connections from the regions of production through to countries of import that can be achieved with publicly available data, and then link this to a variety of jurisdictional sustainability indicators, particularly commodity-driven deforestation, which we calculate through the overlaying of deforestation data together with commodity expansion maps, but also emissions and other impacts. TRACE Finance, which was launched earlier this year, builds on this supply chain mapping that we do in TRACE, which is, as I say, the middle part of the supply chain, and it adds on to that a mapping of the ownership structures, the legal hierarchy, ownership patterns of these companies, as well as the investments and the lendings that are being made to these companies via financial institutions globally. At launch with this prototype platform, which is still very much in the proof of concept phase, this is a new approach. We're looking at just Brazilian soy and beef and Indonesian palm oil, but for the first time we're able to map patterns of ownership and investment and lending comprehensively into these three major sectors, which in total covers more than $1 trillion of equity bonds and loans. Now we can go into the site, and just to give one example of the power of these data, to look at direct and indirect risk exposure. Here is the state pension fund of Norway, and we can see that it has direct exposure through holdings in soy trading companies such as Bunge and Glencore, that have high levels of deforestation risk exposure, but it also has indirect exposure via its holdings in banks such as BTG Pactual, which has itself holdings in JPS, one of the major beef exporters from Brazil. And in addition, it has indirect exposure via holdings in other banks, other regional banks, Maybank here, Malayan Banking, which has exposure itself when we dig into the data due to its own holdings in major palm oil trading companies. So that gives you a flavor of what is possible with these data. And once you've made that connection between ownership structures and investments and trade, then you can make the connection between ownership structures, investments, and impacts on the ground. And those data can be used to strengthen risk management and also to better to strengthen accountability. Now, finally, if you go to our site, you can find our repository of insights. And just to give a flavor of the kinds of things that can be teased out from these data. Now, obviously, looking at patterns of market dominance or market share is a first step. So we can start to discern this for individual companies and see patterns of overall dominance and therefore the potential leverage of these companies for change. Here's an example of Brazilian soy. But most critically, we can start to look at how much difference it really makes to source a particular commodity from different regions within the country where it's produced. And typically we find that there's at least a tenfold difference in deforestation or here in emissions, depending on whether we're sourcing from hotspots or from the average level of impact for a given production region. And what that does is it means that a lot of the risk that's exposed to buyers is highly concentrated, and we can see this is often the case for buyers of soy from Brazil, where most of their risk is concentrated in the Mato Piba region of the northern Cerrado. And once we can do that, then we can start to look at the exposure of different buyers to risk and contrast that against their market share. So here we can see the different beef exporters from Brazil, whether by volume or reinterpreting those same data in terms of deforestation risk. And it is largely the case that larger companies have more risk exposure, but not always. Some companies are operating particularly in deforestation hotspots. We can also then start to look at contrasting patterns of risk exposure by different major markets. And what we've seen with exports of soy from Brazil is that historically the EU was the dominant market, but over time China has pulled ahead to be the major buyer in terms of volume by far. However, what this masks and what our data show is that in the last decade, per ton of soy imported into Europe, there is a higher level of deforestation hectares per ton than going into China until 2018. So that is a reflection of the fact that the EU is sourcing soy in particular, in contrast to China, although it's sourcing lower volumes, from higher risk regions. So there's a higher intensity of deforestation associated with the imports. And just finally, where we're taking this work, there are many challenges as well as opportunities to scaling up the impact and trying to mainstream the uptake of trace data and trace analyses into these agendas to help enable market action, help enable leadership, and also strengthen accountability. And we're trying to achieve that in a number of ways. One of which is trying to prioritize key agendas. And two of the top agendas are around government action, whether that's the legislative agenda in Europe or the building a stronger case, a stronger business and strategic case for a stronger demand side signal from the Chinese government on sustainability of supply chains coming into China. But also working and continuing to work on understanding progress that's being made against zero deforestation commitments, voluntary commitments from companies but also governments, and now this new agenda of trying to improve the extent to which the financial industry can better understand indirect exposure. And one of the main pathways by which we want to try and achieve this scaling up is by empowering multipliers. So they often might be service providers or consultancies or third parties that provide different data products into which we can embed trace data. They might be governments into which we can embed trace information to independent systems, which as an example, we're doing that at the moment with the government of France, the Environment Ministry of France, with their new deforestation monitoring system. And we can also help empower, of course, pressure groups to ensure that campaigning is much more targeted. It is a less blunt instrument and is better able to discern where the problems really are and which are the supply chains and the companies that are most associated with them. And we want to build strategic partnerships with super users to help demonstrate and provide compelling evidence as to the relevance of these data for these priority applications, whilst at the same time catalyze uptake by the research community for new applications that we would never have the resources or the idea to explore in the first place. And it's by doing these different, trying to adopt these different indirect pathways to help empower and enable multipliers that themselves work with many more companies or governments or financial institutions than we ever could directly, that we hope that we can shift TRACE towards very much being a go-to source of credible and dependable information on supply chain sustainability in the next 5 years. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening and for watching. And we very much welcome any feedback, ideas, proposals for collaboration, critiques, and questions that you may have. Please write either directly to me or to anyone else in the TRACE team. Thank you.